My name is Myra Wells. I'm 28 years old. 6 months ago, I flew from Los Angeles to Boston for my sister Victoria's wedding. I arrived at the venue carrying a small silver gift box. When I gave my name at the reception desk, the staff checked the guest list. Then they checked it again. And again. Finally, one of them looked up at me with sympathy. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't here." My stomach dropped. I stepped aside and called my sister. When she answered, I explained what happened. Her response was immediate. "Of course your name isn't there." I froze. "Victoria, I'm your sister." She laughed. "You really thought you'd be invited?" The words hit harder than I expected. I had flown across the country for her wedding, but according to Victoria, I didn't belong there. What she didn't know was that I had brought a gift that would completely change her wedding day. But to understand why, I need to take you back. I grew up in Boston in a wealthy family. From the outside, we looked perfect. Inside, it was a different story. There were 2 daughters. Only one mattered. Victoria was 3 years older than me. She got everything: the bigger bedroom, the expensive clothes, the attention. I got whatever was left. The first time I truly understood my place was on my 10th birthday. I woke up excited. I expected a cake, maybe presents, at least a little celebration. Instead, my parents forgot. My mother spent the day planning one of Victoria's events. My father barely spoke to me. The entire day passed without a single birthday celebration. That night, there was a knock on my bedroom door. It was my grandmother, Eleanor. She sat beside me and handed me a wrapped box. Inside was a real camera. Not a toy, a professional camera. She smiled and said something I never forgot. "You have an artist's eye, Myra. One day the world will see what I see." She was the first person who truly believed in me, and that camera changed my life. Years later, I earned a scholarship to one of the best art schools in the country. For the first time, I thought my parents might finally be proud. On graduation day, I asked them to come. Instead, they chose one of Victoria's networking events. "Photography isn't a real career," my father said. I attended my graduation alone. When I walked across the stage, only one familiar face was in the audience: Grandma Eleanor. She stood and applauded louder than anyone else. After graduation, I left Boston. I moved to Los Angeles with 2 suitcases and a dream. For years, I worked harder than anyone around me. I started as an assistant photographer. Then I built my own business. Slowly, client by client, I created a company called Everlight Studios. Within 10 years, it became one of the most successful wedding photography companies on the West Coast. But my family never knew, or cared. To them, I was still the failure who took pictures for a living. Then everything changed. One morning, I received the phone call. Grandma Eleanor had passed away. I flew back to Boston immediately. At the funeral, I watched my parents and Victoria discussing Grandma's jewelry collection before the service was even over. They weren't grieving. They were already talking about inheritance. After the funeral, Grandma's attorney asked me to stay behind. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter and legal documents. I read them once, then twice. I could barely believe it. Grandma Eleanor had left her entire jewelry collection to me. Not to Victoria, not to my parents, to me. The collection was worth more than $2 million. Then I opened her letter. In it, Grandma explained everything. She wrote that Victoria saw the jewelry as trophies, but I saw them as memories. She trusted me to protect them, and she wanted me to have them. I left the church carrying a secret that nobody else knew, a secret that would eventually explode at my sister's wedding. 3 months later, Victoria got engaged. The wedding would be huge. Hundreds of guests, luxury venue, expensive decorations, exactly the kind of event she loved. I waited for my invitation. It never came. Finally, I called my mother. Her answer broke my heart. "Victoria doesn't want you there." 400 guests were invited, but not me. That night, I made a decision. I would still go to Boston, not to create drama, Not to ruin the wedding, just to deliver one final gift. A small silver box, and inside it, the truth. 3 days before the wedding, I booked a flight from Los Angeles to Boston. I didn't tell anyone. I packed a small suitcase and one silver gift box. The entire flight, I kept wondering if I was making a mistake. Part of me wanted to stay home. Part of me wanted to forget my family completely. But another part of me knew this was something I had to do. Not for Victoria, for myself. For the little girl who spent years feeling invisible. The wedding was being held at the Grand Belmont Hotel. The moment I stepped into the lobby, I understood why everyone was talking about it. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Fresh flowers filled every corner. Guests in designer suits and expensive dresses moved through the building. Everything looked perfect. I walked to the reception table. Name, please? Myra Wells? The receptionist searched the guest list, then searched again. Finally, she looked at me with sympathy. I'm sorry, your name isn't here. Even though I expected it, hearing those words still hurt. I stepped aside and called Victoria. She answered immediately. What do you want? I'm at the hotel. So? My name isn't on the guest list. A long silence followed. Then she laughed. Of course it isn't. I'm your sister. You really thought I'd invite you? I closed my eyes. I flew across the country. That's your problem, not mine. Her voice became colder. This wedding is for important people, Myra. I felt my chest tighten. I just wanted to give you a wedding gift. A gift? She laughed again. What could you possibly give me that I don't already have? I said nothing. Then she delivered the final blow. Nobody wants you here. Not Mom. Not Dad. And definitely not me. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. 28 years of rejection suddenly felt very heavy. Finally, I replied calmly, I understand. I'll leave the gift. Fine. And don't cause a scene. Then she hung up. I stared at my phone. Oddly enough, I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying either, because I knew something she didn't. The truth was already sitting inside that silver box. I walked over to the gift table. It was overflowing with expensive presents. Designer boxes, luxury wrapping paper, golden ribbons. My gift looked tiny compared to the others. I carefully placed it near the front. Then I attached a small card. To Victoria, from your sister, Myra. I looked at it for a moment. That little silver box contained 4 things. A copy of Grandma Eleanor's will, a personal letter written by Grandma, a photograph of Grandma and me together, and one final document. A document that would shock Victoria even more than the inheritance papers. I took one last look at the ballroom. Somewhere inside, my parents were celebrating. Victoria was smiling for photographs, and nobody even realized I had been there. I turned around and walked away. Outside, I took a taxi directly to Logan Airport. As the city disappeared behind me, I felt strangely calm. My job was done. Now all I had to do was wait. Hours later, I sat in the airport lounge with a cup of coffee. The reception had already started. Guests were eating dinner. The speeches were probably underway. Soon, according to family tradition, Victoria and Marcus would begin opening gifts. I checked the time. 7:45 p.m. Any minute now. Somewhere inside the Grand Belmont Hotel, Victoria was about to discover the truth. And her perfect wedding day was about to change forever. Back at the ballroom, everything looked magical. 400 guests filled the room. The orchestra played softly. Champagne glasses sparkled under the chandeliers. Victoria stood at the center of it all, beautiful, confident, completely unaware of what was coming. She moved to the gift table, smiling. Let's see what everyone brought us. Guests laughed. She opened several expensive presents. Crystal, silver, luxury decorations. Then she picked up a small silver box. My silver box. She glanced at the card. Her smile immediately changed. "Oh, look," she said. "A gift from my sister." Several guests exchanged awkward looks. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Let's see what she managed to come up with." She untied the ribbon, opened the lid, and pulled out the first document. At first, she looked confused. Then her expression changed. The smile disappeared. The color drained from her face. Marcus noticed immediately. "Victoria?" She didn't answer. She kept reading. Her hands started shaking. The room grew quieter. Then she opened Grandma Eleanor's letter. She read several lines. Suddenly, tears filled her eyes. "This can't be real!" Marcus stood beside her. "What happened?" Still no answer. Guests nearby began paying attention. Victoria looked completely shocked. Then she whispered something nobody expected. "Grandma left everything to Myra." The room went silent. For the first time all evening, nobody spoke. And Victoria had not yet reached the final document, the document waiting at the bottom of the box. The one that would destroy every lie she had told about me. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Victoria stood frozen beside the gift table. Her hands trembled as she stared at the documents. Marcus stepped closer. "Victoria, what's going on?" She finally handed him the papers. Marcus quickly read the first page. Then his eyes widened. "This says the Hartwell jewelry collection belongs to Myra." Victoria shook her head. No, this has to be fake." My mother rushed over. "What happened?" Victoria shoved the documents toward her. Patricia read the will. Within seconds, the color disappeared from her face. My father arrived next. He recognized Grandma Eleanor's signature immediately. There was no mistake. The documents were real. The jewelry collection worth more than $2 million belonged to me. Not Victoria. Not my parents. Me. Whispers spread through the ballroom. Guests who had spent months hearing Victoria brag about her inheritance suddenly realized she had been wrong all along. A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks. Others quietly pulled out their phones. Victoria looked ready to collapse. Then, Marcus noticed another document inside the box. "Wait! There's something else." Victoria grabbed the paper. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. Then she saw the name. Everlight Studios. Her eyes moved down the page. Client, Victoria Wells. Owner, Myra Wells. Victoria stopped breathing. "No." She looked again. "No!" Her voice became louder. "No!" Marcus took the contract from her hands. His eyes narrowed. "You hired her company?" Victoria stared at him. "I didn't know." Marcus continued reading. The contract clearly identified me as the owner of Everlight Studios, one of the most successful wedding photography companies in California. The same company photographing the wedding. The same company Victoria had personally hired. The same company she had paid $15,000 to secure. Suddenly, Marcus looked confused. "Victoria, you told me your sister couldn't keep a job. You said she struggled financially. You said your family supported her." Victoria couldn't answer, because none of it was true. At that moment, the lead photographer stepped forward. She had been quietly working the event all evening. "Excuse me." Everyone turned toward her. "I work for Everlight Studios." Victoria stared at her. "You work for Myra?" "Yes." The photographer nodded. "Ms. Wells owns the company. We photographed hundreds of luxury weddings. The company is considered one of the best in the country." The room erupted into whispers. "What? She owns Everlight Studios?" "I've heard of them. They're booked years in advance." Someone near the back spoke up. "I know Myra Wells." Heads turned. The speaker was Richard Payton, one of the most respected business leaders in Boston. "My daughter hired Everlight Studios last year. They were exceptional." Another guest raised her hand. "They photographed our charity gala." A third guest added, They've been featured in major magazines. More voices followed, one after another. Everyone seemed to know about my company, everyone except my own family. My mother looked stunned. My father appeared speechless. Victoria looked like she was living inside a nightmare. Everything she believed about me was collapsing. Everything she had told people about me was being exposed, and there was nowhere to hide. Marcus slowly lowered the contract. Then he asked the question nobody expected. "What else have you lied about?" The entire ballroom went quiet again. Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out, because for the first time in her life, she couldn't control the story. Then, another voice entered the conversation. Caroline Ashford, the wedding planner, and Grandma Eleanor's closest friend. She stepped forward calmly. "I can confirm the will is authentic." The room listened carefully. "I was present when Eleanor signed the documents. I know exactly why she left the jewelry to Myra." Victoria stared at her. "Why?" Caroline looked directly at her. "Because Eleanor believed Myra loved the history behind those pieces." Then she paused. "And because she believed you only loved their value." The words hit like a hammer. Several guests looked away. Others stared openly. Caroline continued. "Eleanor once told me something. She said Victoria sees jewelry as trophies, but Myra sees them as memories." Silence. Pure silence. 400 people, not a single voice. The truth had finally arrived, and it had arrived at the worst possible moment. Victoria's wedding reception. Her perfect day, her perfect image, her perfect reputation. All of it was cracking right in front of everyone. Then her phone appeared in her hand. She immediately searched for my number. Call. Declined. Call. Declined. Again. 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 No answer. Because at that exact moment, I was sitting in an airport lounge, thousands of miles away emotionally from the people who had ignored me my entire life. My phone vibrated nonstop. Victoria. Mom. Dad. Victoria. Mom. Dad. Over and over. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages, demand after demand, question after question. But I never picked up. For 28 years, they hadn't listened when I spoke. Tonight, I had nothing left to say. And back in Boston, the wedding reception was slowly falling apart. Guests were leaving early. Conversations had stopped. The celebration was gone. All anyone could talk about was the bride, the inheritance, and the sister everyone had underestimated. The sister who turned out to be the most successful person in the family. By the end of the night, Marcus wasn't standing beside Victoria anymore. He was standing several feet away, looking at her like a stranger. And for Victoria, that was far more frightening than losing the jewelry, because she was beginning to realize she might lose something else. Her marriage, her future, and the perfect life she had spent years trying to build. The next morning, I landed in Los Angeles. For the first time in years, I felt calm. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't argued. I hadn't tried to hurt anyone. I had simply delivered the truth, and now everyone had to deal with it. When I arrived at my office, my assistant Jenna was waiting. "You need to see this." She handed me her phone. A wedding guest had uploaded a video from the reception. The clip showed Victoria opening the silver box, reading Grandma Eleanor's will, discovering the truth about Everlight Studios. Within hours, the video had gone viral. Millions of people had watched it. Thousands of comments flooded social media. Most of them said the same thing. Never underestimate the quiet one. I didn't celebrate. I didn't enjoy watching my sister suffer, because, despite everything, she was still my sister. A few days later, my mother arrived at my office. She looked different, tired, older, broken. When she walked inside, she stared at the walls covered with awards and magazine covers. "This is all yours?" she asked quietly. "Yes." For a moment, she said nothing, then tears filled her eyes. "We never knew." I looked at her calmly. You never asked. That sentence hit her harder than anything else. She sat down across from me, and for the first time in my life, my mother told the truth. We failed you. I stayed silent. She continued. Victoria always demanded attention. You never did. We convinced ourselves that meant you were okay. She wiped tears from her face. But you weren't okay. No, I said softly. I wasn't. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. I'm sorry. Not an excuse, not a justification, a real apology. And somehow, that mattered. Before leaving, she told me what happened after the wedding. Marcus had postponed the honeymoon. The Thornton family had serious concerns. Victoria's reputation at work had been damaged. And most importantly, Marcus no longer trusted her. Everything she had built around lies was falling apart. Not because of me, because of the choices she made. After my mother left, I sat alone in my office, thinking, reflecting, healing. For years, I believed success would finally earn my family's love. I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, proved enough, they would eventually see me. I was wrong. The truth is, your worth doesn't come from other people's approval. It never has. And it never will. A week later, I visited the bank. The Hartwell collection was stored inside a private vault. For the first time, I saw every piece together. Pearls, diamonds, sapphires, generations of family history. I carefully held each piece, not because of the money, because of what they represented. Grandma Eleanor's faith in me, her love, her belief that I would protect what mattered. That's when I made my decision. The most important pieces would be loaned to a museum in Boston. There, people could appreciate their history, and Grandma Eleanor's legacy would live on. As I prepared to leave, the bank manager handed me an envelope. We found this in the vault. I opened it. Inside was a final note from Grandma. My darling Myra, I left something for Victoria too. A simple pearl bracelet. Not valuable, not famous, just meaningful. Perhaps one day she will understand the difference. Love always, Grandma Eleanor. I stood there holding the letter, and suddenly I understood everything. Grandma never hated Victoria. She simply hoped she would grow. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. The viral video faded. Reporters stopped calling. The internet moved on. But some things changed forever. My mother started calling once a week. Not to talk about Victoria, not to criticize, just to talk. Sometimes about work, sometimes about life. Slowly, we started building something we never had before. A relationship. My father sent me a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, an apology for years of blindness. I wasn't ready to answer immediately, but for the first time, I considered it. And then there was Victoria. One afternoon, 6 months after the wedding, my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but I did. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, I'm trying to understand. That wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was honest. And honestly was more than I had ever received from her before. Maybe one day there would be healing. Maybe there wouldn't. That choice belonged to her. As for me, I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. The best response to being underestimated isn't revenge, it's growth. The best response to rejection isn't bitterness, it's building a life you're proud of. And the best response to people who refuse to see your value is recognizing it yourself. I didn't go to Boston to destroy my sister. I didn't leave that silver box to ruin her wedding. I did it because for 28 years, I had been invisible. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself. Grandma Eleanor once told me something I never forgot. The greatest treasures aren't the ones people fight over, they're the ones quietly passed on. She wasn't talking about jewelry, she was talking about strength, self-respect, and knowing your worth. Those became my real inheritance, and unlike diamonds or pearls, no one could ever take them away. Before you go, I want to leave you with one final thought. Sometimes, the people who overlook you the most are the same people who taught you how strong you really are. Not because they supported you, but because you learned to survive without their approval. My story was never really about a wedding. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about jewelry. It was about learning your value when the people closest to you refused to see it. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to walk away from people you loved just to protect your peace, then I hope this story reminds you of one thing. Your worth is not decided by anyone else's opinion. Never shrink yourself to fit into someone else's expectations. Stand tall, build your life, and let your success speak for itself. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Myra's place? I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Take care of yourselves, keep believing in your worth, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye for now.